Good afternoon and welcome to the University of Roehampton, which takes great pleasure this afternoon in hosting this Roehampton Partnership meeting on transport and sustainable growth. I'm pleased to welcome you all here this afternoon, and it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers, Fleur Anderson MP for Putney since 2019, Molly Scott-Cato, Professor of Green Economics at the University of Roehampton and former Green MEP for South West England and Gibraltar. Deacon Cathy Johnson, Deacon within the Methodist Church and currently working with the church in Putney and Roehampton. And last but not least, Caroline Russell, leader of the City Hall Greens, who will be exploring the challenges of working with Transport for London this afternoon. Today, we have set up this meeting as an action meeting from the start, and we hope that there will be takeaways from all of us and actions that we can implement in our local community, but also lobbying points for us in terms of both TfL and other organisations who are responsible for the transport links in this part of London. And key to this discussion is, of course, the lack of transport links in this area. Train connections are restricted to Putney and Barnes station, and with the closure of Hammersmith Bridge in April 2019, links to other London hubs have become significantly reduced. And this situation presents significant barriers to attracting new businesses and innovation within the ward, and also presents sustainability and air quality challenges, and the need that as a result of the closure of a number of transport links for people to rely on road vehicles. The lack of transport links also exacerbates inequality levels in the area, and there is a widely accepted relationship between transportation and mobility and social exclusion, and this is very visible in Roehampton, where communities and individuals without access to private vehicles lack fast and reliable transport options, in turn affecting jobs, socialising and recreation opportunities. Regeneration efforts in Roehampton will need to consider how transport can be more effective and more sustainable, and how to ensure that the area is both affordable and also offers opportunities to a wide range of communities and has accessible local employment and leisure opportunities. In the post-COVID recovery period, the work and living patterns are expected to shift, and organisations are becoming less reliant on central London office spaces, and therefore there are opportunities as well as challenges to address. I would now like to begin this discussion with our opening questions. Let me start, if I may, with Fleur first. Fleur, what does Roehampton need to become a district of sustainable growth?
Thanks, Jean-Noel, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon. I know I've spoken to several people who are joining to take part in this meeting, and I know it's really, really important to local people in Roehampton. Ever since I've been working in Roehampton, I was a councillor before, for Wandsworth before I was an MP. It's one of the main issues that comes up about transport issues in different ways. And I know that for the regeneration, as you have said, to be successful, we need to get transport right. So at this stage of this kind of pausing of the regeneration and looking for a new developer, this is the right time to be talking about transport and how we get it right. So a very welcome discussion that we'll have this afternoon. And I'm glad it's got that action focus that you talked about at the beginning as well. So what will happen as a result? I think in Roehampton, we've had so many consultations about things, so many discussions. We need to see these changes on the ground. So what don't we have at the moment, I think is a good starting place for thinking about what do we need then to have a sustainable growth area that we need in Roehampton. At the moment, I've knocked on many doors. I've held community meetings with our local councillors, and I have also been along to youth consultations as well about what do people see as the problems with transport in their area. And in fact, what do people see as the problems and the opportunities? And transport always comes up. Young people in their consultation, they really talked about buses. about there not being enough buses and about those buses being too packed. And that is an issue that comes up time and time again. So getting our bus service sorted out and able to link to other public transport services, the other train stations that are nearby, is really, really important. And I think as well, we need to look at, I mean, some really big issues would be a tube extension or a tram. And I've had so many people talking to me about a potential tram or tube. That would be absolutely transformational for Roehampton. And I think I would just like to put that into any conversation that we have to enable those public transport links to really transform our area and transform, as you say, employment prospects as well, which will in turn make the whole regeneration successful. Also sustainable transport, so being able to walk around easily and more ability for cycling as well, so more cycle parking and better cycle safe routes. We have the A3 so near to us and Roehampton Lane, which kind of cuts through our community, but thinking about ways in which we can go across those roads and make more use of better walking and cycling. And there are some opportunities in the regeneration, but it's not only the regeneration area that we're talking about, it's about the whole of Roehampton. And I think a final comment from me, and I'm sure we'll talk about more, is the concept of a 15-minute town, or doing everything that you can within a 15-minute walk would really change the way we think about what services we have in Roehampton, the ability to work closer to home, more workspace, more job opportunities in Roehampton and closer to us, more services in Roehampton rather than having to go out to Putney, to Kingston, but having them here with us in Roehampton. All of these ways in which we would be transformational. And so many people have said to me as well, we feel like the last village in London. We're so well connected and in such a fantastic place right on Richmond Park, and yet feel really isolated. And in the planning documents, this was also authenticated as well. They said Roehampton does not have good transport links. So to encourage and enable those links, both to enable us to be more local, not to have to travel, but when we have to travel, to enable us to get out and travel much better, would make all the difference for Roehampton. So I'm sure there's more we can say about all of those aspects.
Thank you very much, Fleur. Kathy, can I bring you in at this point? I think you live on the Alton estate. What is your perspective?
Yes, I do. I think I did a lot of nodding while Fleur was talking, because a lot of the conversations that she's had with people, I can echo that I've had with people. When I moved here in 2018, they asked us to do a project on the context that we're moving into when we join somewhere new for stationing with the church. And I could not believe how many people said to me that they felt isolated, and they were talking at a personal level and as a community level. They were very isolated, and I've never heard so many people say that. And part of it is the problem that there is not sort of linked up transport. A lot of the buses take a long time to get to wherever they're going. If you're trying to get to Kingston by car, you can whiz down there in about 15, 20, 25 minutes and park somewhere. If you're going by bus, it goes all round everywhere, and you take hours to get to somebody who lives relatively close to you as the crow flies. There are lots, I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this meeting now thinking, yes, the bus that I would like to catch goes all around the houses to get to places. I think part of the problem talking about Roehampton is it's such a long, thin ward. So problems that are an issue for the Alton estate differ to those from Putney Vale, differ to those from the Dover House area. But all of us feel that we've got to get on a bus or go somewhere before we can get to somewhere else. So if we want to get to a zone 2 train station, we have to go all the way into Putney. Well, from my door, that will take me a good 35 minutes to do that, just to get to Putney, to link to anywhere else. So I think the Alton estate particularly was well planned when it was initially built, and then it's been infilled and altered, and the road's been blocked off. And so we've ended up with this sort of cul-de-sac estate that's the major part in the heart of Roehampton. But there's been no joined up thinking as things have developed. Things have just happened piecemeal. So you're not in a community that's recognisably a commuter community that goes out, but also you haven't got all the infrastructure that you need to live locally. As Fleur mentioned earlier, you can't get what you need on the estate because it's not been planned that way, and things have gone in and out. And we have so many shops that have moved in. There's been a great ballyhoo, great, we have a hairdresser's or something, and then boom, a few months later they've had to leave again. So I think that feeling of being a backwater is very much in people's minds all the time. The buses take a long time to get to anywhere, the shops open and close, we're cut off from our own high street. Our own high street is the other side of the main road to us. And the regeneration plans that we've had so far, I don't really think address those issues at all. And so we're looking at 800 new households, 2,800 more people on the estate, right in the middle of Roehampton. That'll impact on everybody else, but it's not been thought through as to how that's going to affect everything else.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Caroline, we're hearing a lot of issues which seem to be very specific to Roehampton. I wonder whether there is a London perspective that you want to give.
Well, yes, I mean, there's several things that have been going through my mind as both Fleur and Kathy have been talking. I mean, Kathy was talking about buses taking a really long time to just get down the road to Kingston, whereas if you go in a car, it takes 15 to 20 minutes. Now, I did some research back in 2019, which showed that 1 in 5 Londoners and 1 in 4 Londoners in outer London feel forced to own a car to be able to do their daily journeys. And in a city like London, which is very full, there's just not space for everyone to make their journeys by car. And so we need to make sure that people have got alternatives to car use that are safe and convenient, whether it's using a bike, whether it's walking, or whether it's catching the bus. And those ways of getting around need to be absolutely prioritised, partly just so we can meet our climate commitments, because we've got, we're trying to meet a 2030 deadline for zero carbon, and there's an awful lot of carbon emissions that come from using a car every day. The other problem with car, with an area with not enough good public transport links and not enough good walking and cycling facilities is that that you end up with worse air pollution. And every car on the road, whether it's an electric vehicle or whether it's a diesel or a petrol vehicle, creates PM 2.5 particle pollution from the tyre wear and the road wear of those wheels turning around. And we have a crisis of air pollution in London. It's harming people's health. We're living through a respiratory pandemic, and we really need to be doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we can trust the air we breathe. So it's there's a lot of issues all coming together that show that we need better public transport, we need reliable buses, we need to make sure the buses are being prioritised and that people are able to get around safely under their own steam. Kathy also mentioned a difficult big main road that's hard to cross. I did a report for the Transport Committee called Hostile Streets, where we were looking at how difficult it is, what barriers these big main roads can cause for communities that are living either side of them. And we heard from grandparents picking up children from primary school and really struggling to cross these big main roads. And I've recently done research with Transport for London to find out that there's huge numbers of crossings that have signals but don't have a pedestrian phase in the lights. And there's a real need to make sure it's easy and convenient for people to cross the road easily, because that makes all the difference for people making their daily, everyday journeys.
Thank you very much, Caroline. We have a lot of questions already in the chat, but before we look at those, I was going to ask Molly, as an economist, Molly, what's your take on some of these issues that we've heard about?
Well, thank you for introducing me as an economist, because I'm very much not a transport expert, and I will defer to the others on that. But I think the question I would like to ask is, what sort of transport should we be encouraging to make sure that we can guarantee economic and social success for Roehampton? And I think we've already heard that the sort of transport system we've got at the moment isn't achieving that. So Kathy talks about isolation on the Alton estate, but often that isolation is because actually the outside environment is made so unpleasant by busy roads and by cars, and as we've all discussed, there's some really big roads going through Roehampton, and that actually isolates people from each other. It's particularly bad if you don't have a car, which I'm sure a lot of people that live on the Alton estate actually don't have access to a vehicle. It's a surprising number of people nationally who don't, and especially older people who are obviously more likely to be isolated and suffering from loneliness. So to me, that would be the first question, not how can I get faster from A to B, but how can we create a transport system that means the local economy of Roehampton is more successful, and also we have a happier and more cohesive society. And like Caroline, I don't think that's about switching petrol and diesel cars for electric cars. I think it's about replanning our transport systems. It's great that buses are coming back into fashion, because they've been the sort of Cinderella of transport for a long time, especially outside London, actually. But also we need ways of connecting buses to cycleways, and we need ways of enabling people to put their bike on the bus so that the last part of their journey can be done by bike. That's normal in other European countries, but for some reason in the UK, it's difficult to transport your bike, even by train, and especially by bus. And of course, the real bonus is, I mean, we have serious levels of deprivation on the Alton estate and in large parts of Roehampton. And of course, the bonus of this type of active travel system is that it really improves public health as well. So people are happier because they're not so isolated, and they're healthier because they're not suffering from air pollution, and because there's sort of exercise built into their day, rather than having to book in to go to the gym and then travel everywhere by car. So I think this kind of model of transport, I'm going to talk in a bit, hopefully, about how that also boosts the economy, because it's better to have your economy within the 15-minute neighbourhood, as Fleur mentioned, than to improve speeds so that people travel out of Roehampton to spend their money. That would then cut across the economic development part of what we're going to talk about this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Molly. So that brings us very nicely to some of the questions which we have from listeners, and those have been relayed to us in a summarized fashion. So apologies if I miss some of the detailed points when I summarize those. But there is a first set of questions on better access to the existing transport infrastructure. And those are, for instance, around bus stops, around crossings. So what can we do to improve access to the existing infrastructure? That's the first set of questions. The second set of questions is, how can we improve the infrastructure itself? And in particular, there are a number of questions around cycle lanes, which are thought to be much needed in this part of London. Who'd like to come in? Fleur.
Yeah, thanks. A very practical question, quite right. What can we do now that's quick rather than big and long? And I think we should be talking about both of those, of the big infrastructure, but also the now. And it's clear that we need more buses. So before the pandemic, in my few weeks that I had as an MP before we had lockdown, one of the biggest issues that people were talking about was this getting off at Barnes station and having to walk a long way in the rain because they couldn't get onto a bus, or the buses were too infrequent. And so that needs to be addressed. And about the buses that are too infrequent coming through Roehampton as well, and extending some of the routes as well. So maybe extending the route up from Asda into Roehampton and across to Barnes Station. This was absolutely compounded by Hammersmith Bridge being closed. As soon as it was closed, I was immediately talking to people in Roehampton and saying it's taking me an extra hour in the morning and an hour in the evening to get to work. And that's just not acceptable. And I've absolutely been passionate about getting Hammersmith Bridge opened, because that will speed up a lot of those routes as fast as possible. Now, we're about to have the boat race this next weekend. It should have been going under Hammersmith Bridge, starting at Putney, one of the biggest events in our area, and it can't even happen because the bridge is too dangerous. So by the boat race next year, in fact, before that, we need to have that Bridge made safe and reopened again. So for that, we need to have the Transport Minister providing the money to Hammersmith and Fulham Council. So that is going to have a knock-on effect across the whole area, including Roehampton, but also anyone in Roehampton getting into London, going to work, going for healthcare reasons, going for lots of reasons that we want to get across that bridge. So more buses and more routes are what we need. And I've been talking to Heidi Alexander, who's the Deputy Mayor for Transport. Had a meeting with her just before lockdown, when everything seemed to be like, this is the beginning of good conversations that we can have. But then since then, with the pandemic and the effect it's had on Transport for London's amount of income, that's a whole different conversation, unfortunately. And it is planned to have more bus routes in the regeneration. So there's an extra bus driver for one route and an extra extension of another route. But that's too far away. That could be 10 years away. We actually need some change sooner than that. So it's got to be more conversations with Transport for London as we start to go back on the bus routes. But that won't be done until there are enough people on the buses. They can't be running empty buses. So we need to have that conversation. Maybe more work with the university. Jean-Noel, maybe you can come in with this as well, that you have buses. So more working together on bus routes locally. I know lots of local people see those buses going by and think, how can we join up more and better? So that might be another way of talking about that. And I know that lots of questions about cycle lanes. Couldn't be anything closer to my heart. Safe cycle lanes. Roehampton Lane is absolutely perfect for a safe cycle lane. It's definitely wide enough. As someone said in the chat, it's like an urban motorway. And as Kathy said, it cuts through our community. So having more safe cycle lanes along Roehampton Lane to encourage people to go up there, to go to school, to go to the schools there on safely, rather than no parent feels that they can go across to Sacred Heart or up to the Mosaic School on that road, cycling on that road. It's far too dangerous. But with cycle routes, it would really open up the ability of families to cycle across. That's such an important part of our community. So those are things that could happen quite quickly. But I think at the same time, we need to talk about those big projects that would be game changers for Roehampton as well.
Thank you, Fleur. Caroline, a lot of the answers seem to lay at the door of TfL.
Unmute myself. The issue with Hammersmith Bridge is very, very complex, and it has become very nastily political, particularly as we've been in the run-up to this election. We have a problem that Transport for London's overall funding has been absolutely decimated by the pandemic. The former Mayor Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, accepted that London should accept a funding model where we're utterly dependent on fares income, much more than any other major city in the world. And so when the pandemic happened and the ridership on the tube and the buses went right down, Transport for London basically just could not keep going. Now, other organisations like train companies have had bailouts from the government. Transport for London has had to fight for every single bailout, and they come too late, and it is absolutely no way to run a transport system for a major world city. And it's been disgraceful the way that the government has been kind of taking it to the wire every time and making it very difficult for TfL to do anything other than emergency street space measures and keeping the basic buses and tubes running. They're not doing any of the interesting groundbreaking work that they've been doing over the years of kind of fixing dangerous junctions and putting in new big infrastructure to make our roads safer for people who are walking and cycling. But then you have the issue with Hammersmith Bridge, which this is a climate change risk. This bridge has not been well maintained over the years. For decades, it has not been well maintained. And it is like this there is infrastructure all over our city that is poorly maintained and at risk of failure due to hotter summers, colder winters, cracks worsening due to heat stress. And the there's got to be a real rethink about how we look after our critical infrastructure, because we can see with Hammersmith Bridge the absolute disruption that that causes for people's everyday lives. All the people who used to either walk or cycle or catch the bus over that bridge have had their journeys kind of made intolerably difficult by the loss of that bridge. But there isn't an easy fix. You know, they're working on a ferry, but there isn't a kind of an easy magic wand that anyone can raise, because this bridge is going to be very, very complex to fix. It's I'm not going to get into all the engineering, but there isn't a kind of a simple thing, oh, they should just get on and do that. It is going to take time to repair it. And I think the only other thing I just want to say on this is that there is another bridge, the Cremorne Bridge, a little bit further east down the river, but that's a walking and cycling bridge that has been designed pro bono, is actually ready, it's shovel ready, it's got piles in already, which have gone in when different bits of development have been done on the riverbanks. And that is a bridge that if the mayor had got behind it at the beginning of this term, back in 2016, he could have already cut the ribbon on it. And we do need to be making sure that we are investing in the things that will make Londoners' lives easier to get around.
Thank you very much. I'd like to perhaps bring Kathy and Molly into the conversation at this point, because what we seem to have here is the need to make the case, and the case is clear, the case is economic, and the case is social. So as a collective of Roehampton citizens, as a collective of Roehampton organizations, how do we continue to make that case, and how do we make a convincing case that is going to convince, in the end, funders to improve transport links, including Hammersmith Bridge? Molly, do you want to come in first?
Well, I think that COVID has really changed the way we think about our community and our society, and it's really increased people's sense of solidarity and also their sense of place and their wish to invest and be a part of the community they live in. And something I observe about Roehampton is that it must be one of the most mixed boroughs anywhere in the world in terms of income and wealth, because you've got, Roehampton and the Alton Estate right up next door to Richmond and Putney. And okay, I could make some proposals as an economist about how you might redistribute wealth, but part of that is about where you seek the investment. You know, do you ask the wealthier businesses to contribute more? Obviously, I would like to seek public investment, and I believe we should make a strong appeal for major climate resilience measures, as Caroline was suggesting, but also if we're serious about net zero carbon, then we have to go through a modal shift in terms of transport, and that needs really significant investment. And I would suggest that we make a proposal along those lines as the community of Roehampton. And, you know, this government says it's in favour of levelling up. Roehampton is exactly the sort of place that needs levelling up. You don't have to wear a flat cap in order to be an area that's been left behind in terms of investment. So, you know, I think that equality argument is really important. And I mean, I was going to start out by saying that I'm coming to you from rural Gloucestershire, where we get £300 of investment a year on transport, whereas you get £900 a year. But that's not really the point, is it? Because London is not a block. You know, some parts of London need far more investment than other parts. But I just wanted, if you don't mind, to quickly answer a couple of those questions there. One in terms of cycle lanes. I think that cycle lanes have to be nicer places to be than roads, right? If they're just the same as roads and really unpleasant, but you're a little bit safer than mixing it with lorries, then people aren't going to switch to cycling. I mean, I don't have a car. I've tried all these things. So I can tell you it's really unpleasant if you're just next door to a car and there's a few little bollards there. And I've also cycled in continental cities where you have the space by the river. You have the really nice place where you're cycling. That's what cycleways are about. They're about making it nicer to cycle than it is to drive a car, and then people will make that switch. And I also wanted to just talk briefly about Amsterdam, which obviously is everybody's paradigm of a wonderful active travel city. But if you go back and look at videos of Amsterdam in the 1970s, it was worse than London is now. It was completely chocker with cars. And the reason that changed was that some mothers set up an organisation which translates, I mean, they're very blunt, aren't they, the Dutch? But it translates as Stop the Child Murder. That was the name of their organisation because they were so tired of children being killed by cars. And children are still being killed by cars through air pollution. And I think we need to take some inspiration from that and think, it's a slow process. Gradually, they changed the way the road system worked. They spent a lot of money, certainly, improving access for cyclists and safe cycle routes. But, they were able to do that. And I think it's having that long-term vision of 30 or 40 years and thinking, actually, you want a city that is much more friendly towards walkers and cyclists and public transport users. And I'm going to say, because I'm not looking for votes in the Roehampton area, much less friendly towards the car. To me, that's a vital part of the shift we need to undergo. And that would be economically successful as well as socially successful.
Thank you very much, Monique. Cathy?
I would say a lot of this discussion relates to all parts of London and all parts of England. It's not just Roehampton. And it's interesting that I was reading recently that there's a proposed review of the highway code to reprioritise who has rights of way in roads, and that the pedestrians and cyclists don't always come last, because that's what's happening at the moment. Pedestrians and cyclists are always the last priority on a road, even if it's a junction. You're taking your life in your hands when you step off that curb if you're not careful. And it concerns me that if we go for cycle routes round Richmond Park and Roehampton, that it won't be done properly. Because we have a cycle path down the side of Upper Richmond Road at the moment, which comes in and out. It stops, it starts. It's terrifying when you're driving. I'm convinced that I'm going to have an altercation with the cyclist at some point, because you come up to the lights, the cycle lane comes to a complete halt, you're waiting at the lights, so you're surrounded by a surge of cyclists who've caught you up from behind and are now in front of you at the lights. I'm trying to turn left, I don't know whether somebody's going to come up on my inside. Cycling proficiency would have told that person not to do that, but people are on bikes, they're very enthusiastic about cycling around Roehampton. It's the really in thing at the moment. We have cyclists everywhere. It drives the bus drivers down Danebury Avenue nuts, because they cycle 3 abreast down the middle of the road, and it's absolutely wonderful. But it's not being done properly. And I too have been on holiday to Holland, to the Netherlands, and to the north of the Netherlands, and they have completely separate routes for bikes. And it's just so wonderful. Even I will cycle in the north of the Netherlands, where I would never, ever, ever dream on getting on a bike around Roehampton. It would terrify me. We need to do it properly. And that wouldn't be such a vast capital investment as some of the other things that we really need, like an extension of the Northern Line or an extension of the tram line from Wimbledon. But, it would be a start, wouldn't it, if we could just encourage people to carry on with what they've discovered during lockdown and cycle and walk more.
Fleur.
Thank you, Jean-Noel. And you asked how we could get together and make a change. And there's a couple of things that we can do in Roehampton as well, very specifically to Roehampton. One is to learn from some changes that have been made recently. So there are, as you mentioned earlier, health inequalities within Roehampton and between Roehampton and other parts of Wandsworth, or even other parts of Putney. For too long, there hasn't been enough healthcare provision, and it's been overlooked. And one example is not having a vaccine centre. I think we should have a vaccine centre in the heart of Roehampton. And so I have met with the vaccine minister. I've gone on and on and on about Roehampton. But that's also been backed by local GPs, also having their say and making sure that they're heard. And we now have the vaccine centre open at Queen Mary's Hospital. I had my vaccine there yesterday. All went well. It's very good. But we need to keep up that, constantly talking up about Roehampton, about our fantastic community, and everywhere we can. And I think the Roehampton Partnership has got an absolutely vital role to play in this, making the case together, all the key right people in the room, local people able to amplify their voices together to the people who are making the decisions. Well, that's where Roehampton Partnership really can play a vital role. And coming out of this meeting, I hope that can be, this is the first step really of what can be further conversations, and that can happen in the partnership, and welcoming in other local organisations to that conversation as well. On Hammersmith Bridge, how can we make the coalition? How can we raise our voices and make a change? Well, I've been speaking in Parliament incessantly. I've been joining forces with local MPs, with Sarah Olney in Richmond Park, with Andy Slaughter across the river, and with Ruth Cadbury. So it's cross-party as well. This is beyond party politics. And this Saturday, I'm having an action. If you want to come down to Embankment, big banner, come down and sign your name and say that you want this to be opened between 1 and 4, not all together. It's got to be socially distant. And loads of rowing clubs are going to come out and support that because it's a boat race. But just using any opportunity we can to raise that issue and tell the government that actually this is not a small bridge that only involves, you know, the community on one side and the community on the other. It involves Roehampton as well, and Roehampton's got to have a say in that conversation. So I will certainly do what I can to enable local people to get involved in that and tell Grant Shapps. That's one thing. But then another thing about local investment. How can we have this 15-minute neighbourhood in Roehampton? There are so many empty shops. It feels like we're just being abandoned and left until the regeneration comes in. And the regeneration is going to take 10 years. We cannot wait for this amount of time. There are avenues of shops and parades outside the regeneration area in Roehampton. Those shops should be full of pop-up businesses trying out businesses. They could be full of more community organisations like Regenerate. There's so much more we could be doing there, and we should be demanding that of the council and not letting that go. Again, that could be something that the partnership but others speak up about, because this is important for transport, not to have to leave Roehampton all the time for the opportunities and the services we need, but be able to have them within Roehampton as well. And then the regeneration, it's ongoing. There's always consultations, making sure that we speak up in those as well about the transport issues that we know are important for our community. All of those ways are ways in which we can have a say. And there were huge changes in the regeneration planning documents as a result of what people said in consultation. So you may feel they have no difference, make no difference, but I've got a pile of the papers here. These are some of the planning documents in the most recent planning round, and there were huge changes in this and lots of changes on transport. Not enough, that's why we're having this meeting today, but lots of changes because of feed-in from the community. So it does make a difference. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll just add another dimension to this discussion, if I may, and that is how do we factor COVID-19 into the changes we need to make? And I wonder whether in some ways we might be thinking about the kind of transport links and the kind of transport infrastructure that might have been needed pre-COVID, but is it the same that we are going to need next year and in 2 years' time and in 5 years' time? Caroline, do you want to start on that one?
Yes, really, really good question. And I'm wondering whether we're ever going to go back to that model of London working with huge flows of people coming in and out of our city every day by train, by bus, by tube. I know that some of those buildings in the city, those big gleaming glass towers, they modelled, I think the cheese grater building was going to take 3 hours every morning and 3 hours every evening to get all their workers in and out of the building, because if you can only have one person in a lift at a time, those buildings don't work very efficiently. And so I think it is, while we have an ongoing need for staying physically apart from each other, which, as I understand it, is something that we are going to be living with for a while, and potentially for years, we're not going to get back to that same way of working as we had before. And so that has implications for areas like Roehampton and areas all over London where people live, because you will have more people working from home and being around locally, buying their, instead of going out in the city to buy a sandwich, they're actually going out locally and getting stuff from their local shops. And does change the kind of the dynamic of the local economy. I think there's huge opportunities. So I think, yes, I think I'm really not sure quite what's going to happen, but I do know that I think we have to keep a turn up and go service working for the tube, the local trains and the buses, because once the transport system ceases to be something that you can just turn up to and get on and it's there for you, then it's much more likely that people are going to turn to cars, even more people turn to cars, and we'll end up with congestion, gridlock and worse pollution. Now, in our local town centres, and Fleur was mentioning, you know, the empty shop fronts, there's a real opportunity for local distribution hubs where packages, you know, the packages that are delivered by, you know, all the different online delivery firms can be delivered by e-cargo bike for the last 2 or 3 miles. There's one hub that DPD have in Westminster where they took over a garage that used to contain the transport commissioner for TfL's car, and they made it into an electric delivery hub, and they have small mopeds which are like little mini vans, and they've got a kind of a contained van bit on the back that contains the parcels. They bring in all the packages from East London from a big depot in an big electric van, and they then get distributed from that smaller depot out on e-mopeds and e-bikes and even on foot to do that local distribution. And I think there's a real opportunity to reduce the number of white vans, petrol and diesel vans that are driving around our city by getting into that, really thinking about that last mile delivery hub, and also thinking about the conditions for those workers who are doing the deliveries. They need access to toilets, they need access to somewhere to have a break, somewhere to stay dry when it's raining. And you are seeing so many more cargo bike deliveries, and we really need to think about making sure that those workers have good conditions for doing their work. But I think they can really be part of the solution. And then the other kind of businesses that I'd like to see in the empty shop fronts are businesses that are working on the circular economy, the repair economy, and apprenticeships for people to learn how to fix things, and so that we reuse items rather than throwing them away. So I think there's a big opportunity there as well, as some of the big chain stores perhaps have not survived the pandemic, that the empty shop fronts could actually be put to use by community-led enterprises that contribute to the circular economy.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Molly, can I bring you in at this point?
Well, I feel Caroline's rather done the job of the green economist there, but I'll just sort of extend and underline some of the things she said. No, because of course I do agree with everything she said. But I would say that I think this is certainly true where I live. I would guess it's true where you live as well, that the main thing COVID-19 has done is made you think differently about where you live, because you've been stuck there, right? Whether you wanted to be or not. For me, I was stuck in the place that the Times recently voted the nicest place to live in Britain. So I made a good choice a few years ago. But you know, maybe obviously other people are not so happy with where they live, but are they now going to think, how do I improve the place where I live, rather than how can I get as fast as possible to my job, and as fast as possible to my sort of foreign escape, and as fast as possible to Epping Forest or Richmond Park, or wherever it is people go to escape the place where they live. I would like to hope that that's the case, and everybody now has an investment in making sure that the community they live in is a thriving community, a sustainable community, and a flourishing community where actually they want to be. And I'm sure everybody has appreciated things about their local place, local parks, you know, green spaces, places you can walk by, waterways, whatever, that they probably weren't aware of when they were able to get in their car and go further afield. So I think that's something we can really build on. And I would like to think that we can also build on the fact that people understand, as Caroline said again, that if they are investing in their local community in terms of where they do their shopping, then that's what's keeping those local shops going. And there's plenty of wealthy people in Wandsworth that could keep the shops going in Roehampton, should they choose. Should we be able to build a sort of sense of community wider than Roehampton itself? That to me would be an aim and an ambition that we could try and achieve. And of course, all of this is really important because we've learned that we need our neighbours because of COVID. But what's coming down the line in terms of climate change is much bigger and more serious in terms of, emergencies caused by extreme weather events. And in a place of, in southwest London, where a lot of it is very close to sea level, we will see events that will require people to depend on their neighbours. So I hope we can really capture something about the sense of community resilience which has arisen as a result of COVID and build on that, because we're going to need that in the next few years as climate change really starts to bite. And I would just, I noticed in the chat there was a couple of questions about what I said about cars, so I'm just going to sort of extend that, or rather clarify. Somebody said nurses and builders need their cars. Of course, I'm not suggesting nurses and builders can't drive. What I'm suggesting is that people who have an option have much better access to cycling and walking and buses. So they are then able to either not have a car or to leave their car at home. And also somebody else pointed out that an awful lot of traffic in Roehampton is through traffic. So the through traffic passing through Roehampton is spoiling people's lives in Roehampton, and then in the next community down the road and the next community down the road, as everybody speeds through to get somewhere and to come back from somewhere. And I think, can we change that attitude so people are actually thinking, I want to make the place where I live the place where I'd actually like to spend my social life and do my shopping, because then everybody's lives would be better, because all the people that are commuting through their community wouldn't be doing that. So that's to me the sort of beauty of 15-minute neighbourhoods, and it would be really transformational in terms of Roehampton, but also in terms of London as a whole. London would again become a system of villages, interconnecting villages, where your main focus was the place where you lived. Perhaps I'm being too visionary. I don't live in London, so you guys can tell me, but I think you could build 100 strads across London and you'd all be really happy.
Thank you very much. Kathy.
Yes, this has just brought up two completely different things in my mind that I would like to say at this point. The first one is, during COVID, our community in Roehampton has pulled together better than it ever has before. The different areas in Roehampton, the Ashburton Estate, the Alton Estate, Putney Vale, Overhouse Road, people and beyond, people from all those areas have joined together, work as community, to help each other. And I know this was featured on the news, wasn't it, at 6 o'clock, that people have pulled together, and it's a genuine thing. People who had not talked to one another before, who were doing good things disparately in different places, have all come together to pull our community together. We're going to celebrate this in July, hopefully, as long as we're on track with the roadmap and everything, from the 5th to the 10th of July. And all the way through this summer, we're going to have events that pull our community together to clean the place up, rejuvenate the area. We want as many volunteers to join in with this as possible. And I think this is a community heart for change, that we could pull in all the things we've talked about so far and incorporate that into conversations that will help us flourish and grow into a much better functioning place than we have been in the past. That was the first point. The second point, completely differently, is that this car issue is quite a major concern, I think, on the estate, in that a family that doesn't want to use a car still may need to have a car for the times that they need it, until we've got all singing, all dancing electric cars that just pootle around until you pick it up and just borrow it and pay up for it on your credit card or whatever. People need their cars. On the estate, and the Alton estate particularly, and I can't speak for other places because I don't know so well, we have a system where there are no parking permits needed. Therefore, we get a lot of people parking on the road who possibly don't even belong to the Alton estate, but it's a good place for them to leave a vehicle. How we can get round this, when I know there is no heart for us to pay for parking permits in our area. How we can get around this, I don't know. But at the moment, that causes congestion for the buses, dangerous situation with bikes in the middle of the road. There are cars everywhere. And my request would be that when the Regeneration is restarted, that a lot closer look is put on parking facilities for people who are going to want to have cars somewhere, even if they park them up 5 days out of 7 because they're working from home. they still will think that they need a car, and quite rightly, because there are no major links to get out of the area otherwise.
Thanks, Kathy.
2 points I wanted to make.
Fleur, can I bring you in on transport in Roehampton and the post-COVID economy?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we get into the realms of real speculation, isn't it? How different will it be after this? We talk about building back better. We talk about all the change that will be there. And we don't really know if in a few months the vaccine will have worked and we will actually be back to everything it was before, or there will be some of these things that we have now that will change us forever. So okay, speculation allowed. I'm really glad that Kathy mentioned the Communities Week on the 5th to the 10th of July. I'll also mention it as well. I think that is different. Roehampton has come together, as Kathy's rightly said, as a community, as entirely new ways, new connections. And I know the university's been absolutely part of that, and councillors who are here have been part of that. And so many community organisations and individuals have said, look, we've got something special here, but we need each other. And we have pulled together at that time. So I hope that remains. And therefore, in terms of what's the link with transport, this gives us a voice about saying what we want in our community. We don't have to just take what we're given. We can make a difference and have a voice as a community. So I hope that we use that. I hope that this new joined up amount of community spirit can be used to say what we want to have in transport and many other areas. And I think that one big issue that we're going to have as we come out of lockdown will be about employment. So lots of people are going to be coming off furlough and they're not going to be having a job, or they'll need to be looking for new jobs. We already have too many people in Roehampton who are working 2 or 3 jobs but are not making ends meet. And we need to move to jobs that pay, but also being able to get to those jobs. And that's where transport comes in. So we do need to make sure that we have employment opportunities, hubs, advice, careers advice, all of those things in Roehampton. They have it in Battersea, they have it in other parts of the borough. We should have that in Roehampton. So that's one thing, to enable employment opportunities to be known about by local people and those connections to be made. So yeah, employment, being able to access employment. As Kathy says, we do have different car needs in Roehampton, and I think that is important. So we have a lot of people who are in temporary accommodation, having to travel back to their area where they were living for school and other reasons, and not knowing where they're going to be living next. And having a car is really important for a lot of families in Roehampton who are in that precarious situation. And also a lot who are care workers need the car for that, and lots of other professions that we need to have the car for. So this balance. But I think for that, if we have more cyclists, we can get some of the people who don't need to be driving off the road. It's better for those who do need to use their cars, because there are less cars on the road and less pollution, as we've been talking about up to now. And a final thing that's changed, just very different under COVID, is our love of Richmond Park. So the amount of people from all over Wandsworth and beyond that flood to Richmond Park on the weekend, all week, in fact, is phenomenal. Now, why couldn't we use some of those extra people coming to Roehampton to boost our local businesses? Can we be encouraging more people to be going to Cafe Joy? Can we be looking at a way we have our shops and services in Roehampton that we do attract people to be coming to Roehampton as a great place to visit, and just see it quite differently than we do now, and encouraging the council to see it that way? And they have more money because of COVID as well. So they have some money for the discretionary fund, for example. £1.5 million of that is going to local businesses to boost hospitality. A lot of it's going to Northcote Road to open it up at the weekends. Why shouldn't we have some of that funding as well, so that is another post-COVID opportunity? And a final point is that COVID has made a big difference in Roehampton, because that's the reason why Redrow pulled out as a partner in the development, because they said the future is going to be, for them, more out of London developments. So we're going to be working with a new partner, which brings new opportunities and a new chance for the community to have a discussion with a partner who wants to work with how people want to live post-COVID.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So before I ask my closing question, there are 2 very specific questions from listeners, and one of those is how can members of the community participate in the Community Week in July. Loads of interest there. And Caroline, there was also a question on the putative pedestrian bridge that you mentioned. Who'd like to pick up? Kathy, do you want to
I can pick up about the Community Week.
I can talk about the bridge.
Okay, so the Community Week, there's going to be a lot of publicity coming out over the next few months. You can always email me, and my email is on all sorts of Methodist website things, but there'll be things coming out, there'll be things in the library, there'll be things coming out in the various magazines that are distributed around the area. So you will see a lot of stuff advertising what you can do. And yeah, if you want to email me, then you just look up Methodist, Kathy Johnson Methodist, and I expect my email will pop up.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I'll put it in the chat. I'll do that now.
So the bridge, so I think both Caroline and Flo want to come in. So Caroline, do you want to go first?
Just from a purely practical point of view, it's between, there's the Battersea Bridge and the Wandsworth Bridge. So the Cremorne Bridge or the Diamond Jubilee Bridge is between those two. It's had planning permission since 2013, both from Wandsworth and from Hammersmith and Fulham. And it's yes, it's a new walking and cycling bridge that is fully designed and is ready to go, and it just needs the last bit of funding to get it off the ground. The London Assembly passed a motion in, trying to get the mayor to give it a bit of a boost, and I think it's just one of those projects that just needs that sort of last package of money to get it going, and I think it would make a real difference to people living on both sides of the river, and would open up more journeys for being made without using a car, which would help with the congestion situation.
Thanks, Caroline. Fleur.
I think Caroline answered it. That's the bridge.
Great. So I think we're coming to the end of our discussion, and it would be interesting to try and come up with an action plan. And what are those things that we as a Roehampton community, whether it is through the Roehampton Partnership, whether it is through the university, whether it is through other local organizations, what is it that we need to do? What is it that we can do to solve some of those problems that we have talked about, and that we have provided some analysis against. We know what they are. We know more about what the blockages that we need to unlock might be. What would be the three things that you would think we need to do to unlock all of this? And I'll start perhaps with Kathy on that one.
Three things. Well, it's very interesting when I was talking to my local friends about this meeting and how we were going to talk about transport. A lot of them were saying that they don't take public transport of any sort because it's too dangerous for them to do it. They're either too infirm, or they're disabled, or they're elderly and they can't get on and off buses very easily. So I would absolutely love to see a hopper bus type idea that you could subscribe to or register with, and they would pick you up from your door, take you onto it, even if you were in a wheelchair or whatever. There'd be no hassle or tut-tutting from the rest of the people on the bus, and they would take you from your door to your hospital appointment or wherever else you wanted to go. I would love to see a hopper bus type thing in our community. There's one local to where my husband lives, and it works really brilliantly. I would love to see safer cycle lanes. I think they're absolutely imperative, and they're not a massive great capital outlay compared to some of the other things that we're suggesting. And I would like us to just celebrate the fact that we can walk and cycle and live in our own community. So I would love to see the shops filled with local traders rather than just empty shop fronts on the estate in Alton Estate. And I don't know what the other estates are like with their shops, but that's what I'd like to see where I am.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Molly, what are the three things that you think the Roehampton Partnership and the Roehampton community need to do?
So I've got three specific things, but firstly, I'm going to suggest this idea of community wealth building. And I think we all need to talk to Wandsworth Council about community wealth building, because it could be something they really got behind. It's sort of the opposite of the way they see everything at the moment, which is like spend less money. But obviously, if you have multipliers, then if you spend money locally, you start to really build the economy. And I think sort of trying to talk to Wandsworth about the importance of local multipliers and community wealth building. So once you've got those multipliers, the money stays in the local economy. And the first step they could do towards that is progressive procurement. There's 5 principles, which I won't go into in detail, but progressive procurement would mean that Wandsworth themselves commit to buying stuff from the local businesses that we're talking about trying to preserve in Roehampton High Street or wherever else. I bet they don't do that at the moment. Perhaps I'm wrong, but anyway, we can make sure that they do that in future. Then I would suggest, building on what Fleur said, which I completely agree with, you know, that the people that are in Richmond Park could afford to keep the businesses going in Roehampton. We need to connect those people up. We need to have a sort of, I mean, buy Wandsworth, no, that's not going to work, but something like that, you know, a sort of local shopping that encourages people to really show solidarity with the much poorer community that's right on their doorstep. I think that's something we could build coming out of COVID. And obviously, I'd like to see a much better, fairer taxation system nationally, but under this government, we won't get that. So let's try and do a little bit of wealth transfer locally instead. Then coming back to what Kathy said about people who have cars which they don't use very often, that is a terrible waste of money if you're not a rich household. And much better is to join a car club. And actually, I would suggest we try and get a car club going in Roehampton, because people will then, once you've invested all the sunk costs in a car, you feel inclined to use that car more. Once you're in a car club, the opposite's the case. So people would then know that they had the car if they really needed it because mum was ill or something, but they'd have that psychological support, but at the same time, they wouldn't have the car, so they would be making fewer car journeys. And sorry, this is my third one. I know it's sort of fourth, but it's also third. It's just about better cycle lanes that aren't you right next door to a horrible, stinky truck and actually give you a much nicer experience than driving.
Thank you very much, Molly. Caroline.
Yes, so I've got a package of 3 transport measures, which are quite sort of big picture and will actually help the whole of London. The first thing is that Transport for London, I mentioned earlier, has a huge hole in its finances, because even with people beginning to go back to work a bit, we're not going to be getting the fares income that they have been relying on over the years. They need to build a more resilient income stream. And that can come from smart, fair, privacy-friendly road pricing. That's where you charge per mile and by the engine emissions of a car, and potentially by time of day. So rush hour times of day, it's more expensive than in the middle of the night, and by where the road is. So if you're driving in central London, it's very expensive. If you're driving somewhere where there's very little public transport, it's very, very cheap. But what it would mean is that people who were driving were contributing to Transport for London's finances, so that it's not just the people catching the bus and the tube who are paying to fix the potholes in the road. So that's one thing. It's something that would bring in money for Transport for London. It's much fairer than the congestion charge, where people pay a big fee every day. And once they've paid it, they can drive around as much as they like. With road pricing, you pay a much smaller fee, it's much fairer, and you only pay for the time that you're driving. And so it encourages people to drive much less. So it helps reduce congestion, it helps reduce pollution, and it's generally a really constructive, positive thing for a city. So that's the road pricing to cut the miles driven. Then the next thing is the ultra low emission zone, which is coming out to the north and south circular roads in October this year. It should really cover the whole of London. No Londoner should be left out of the clean air zone. So I'd like to see the ultra low emission zone cover the whole of London. That would mean that the vehicles on the road are cleaner, and the pollution coming from them, although you still get the tyre wear and the road wear, but the pollution coming out of the tailpipes of the cars on the road would be less health damaging, and that would be good for everyone's health. And then finally, a package of measures for enabling walking and cycling. I can't remember if it was Fleur or Kathy talking earlier about the people who need their car for their work, and mentioned carers and people, visiting people in their homes. Well, I had someone who's a district nurse get in touch with me recently who rides a bike to do her rounds, and she was needing more cycle parking on the estates where she was doing her visits, because there was nowhere safe to lock up her bike, and she was actually wasting time trying to find somewhere safe to lock her bike when she arrived at a particular estate to start doing her visits. So I think there's lots of things that we can do to enable people to use bikes, and with e-bikes, that really expands the possibilities for people to use bikes instead of using cars for lots of jobs where people have got used to using cars up until recently. So I think we need a package of measures to enable walking and cycling. We need to be making sure that all the crossings on our big urban main roads have got pedestrian lights, pedestrian signals to be able to get across the road. And we need to have protected bike lanes, and low traffic neighbourhoods also come into this package of measures as a way of reducing the amount of driving that's going on and creating a network of streets where it is safe and convenient for children, older and disabled people to get around under their own steam without worrying about being run over by a car. So that would be my three things.
Thank you very much. Fleur, last but not least, what are the three things that you think as a Roehampton partnership, as a Roehampton community, we need to do?
Thanks very much, John Noel, and thank you to everyone who's contributed here. And I'm sure if we had everyone who's watching able to contribute, we'd have so many different ideas. I think we've sparked off a lot of different thinking. How could it be different? How could our roads look different? How could we live differently in Roehampton? What could be new? Which is a great and exciting conversation to be starting. So I look forward to where this is going next. And thank you very much for holding this. So some of my three, it's really hard to choose three, obviously, but I do agree with a lot of what's gone before, especially Kathy's ideas were all brilliant about what we should do. What specifically as Roehampton Partnership could we be calling for? Well, one is with the new development partner coming in for the Alton estate is to be ready to present what we see as a community on behalf of the Roehampton Partnership to that new developer, and to be talking to the Regeneration team in the council as well, about the ideas coming out of this meeting and that we've heard from the community, and being that community voice, speaking together in a way that will have a lot of weight, but also able to, and working with, there's a new community consultation organizer as well, being employed by the council, which is really, really welcome. We've been talking about we need more community consultation. So that would be one focus. So what we want to see out of the regeneration. The second would be having a say in the Hammersmith Bridge debate at the moment, and calling for the government to fund reopening the bridge, and making sure it's known that this is not just about Barnes or about Hammersmith, it's about the Roehampton community really want to see this as well. And I think that it could be a letter to the minister, or being part of that debate and speaking up for local people on that. And then my third, cheekily, I'm going to put buses and cycling together in a third point. So bus capacity and frequency, it's such an issue. As soon as people start getting back onto the buses, and they will have to get to work, we're going to have those crowded and too infrequent buses again. So inviting TfL to come to the Roehampton Partnership. The council was inviting them before and they didn't come. They must come to the TfL meetings, and I'm sure they will. And I know, speaking to Heidi Alexander and others, they want to engage with us on this, and so talking with them about that. And then I love the fact that I've been to other European cities as well. I've seen the buses on front of the bikes. Putting bikes onto your bus. That would really enable, you could cycle into Barnes station, for example, go to work, come back, and then get the bus back if you can't cycle everywhere. It would really connect up things. So using our buses really smartly, but having those cycle lanes as well, safe cycle lanes, in a way that's joined up, and not in a way, as Kathy says, if you've got to do it right. and get whole joined up cycle routes from Roehampton, and even around Wimbledon Common. There's not a joined up cycle route, so I'm speaking to the Conservatives about that as well. It needs to be a whole ring around different areas, whole routes into Putney, whole routes into Kingston, to make sure we can get about on bikes for those who can. Would be transformative.
Thank you very much, Fleur. So the intention is for the Roehampton Partnership to write up the analysis and the ideas coming out of this meeting. We will, of course, send the report to Wandsworth Council, TfL, and the London Mayor. As we kind of prepare to put everything together, I'd like to bring Molly in just to close perhaps this session on behalf of the academics of the university.
Well, I would like to thank the other contributors very much for what they've brought to the session, and the people on the call who we can't see, who brought their questions. And it's really nice to hear the commitment to really transforming our transport system. And I hope that as academics in Roehampton, we can contribute towards the partnership. I know as a green economist, I'm always very happy to do that. And yeah, I think for me, I just need to go back to that question about, let's make sure it's a kind of transport system that encourages people to want to spend time in Roehampton, because that's the way to revive the economy. So to me, that's how economy and economic regeneration connect up. And I wish the partnership well, and I look forward to seeing the report that comes out of this event and future work together.
Thank you very much. It remains for me to thank our panel tonight. Thank you very much for your contribution, for your ideas, and for the debate that we've had. Thank you also to those of you that have been watching on Facebook and on the Zoom link. And thank you to the Roehampton Partnership for putting tonight's event together. We hope that we'll be able to do this again, perhaps on a face-to-face basis in due course. But thank you very much, and have a good Easter for those of you that celebrate Easter, and see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.